Welcome to Neon Liberalism, a weekly podcast where myself, Samantha Hancox-Lee, and my friend, Jason Brigman, talk about what just happened from a liberal perspective.
Something just happened. Something.
Something very much just happened. This week, especially, more than other weeks, something has
Oh,
just happened.
goodness. So Samantha and I are both associate editors for Liberal Currents, which is a website. And, now we're going to start this podcast. And Samantha, you're a much more successful author than I am, along with being an editor of Liberal Currents, having produced numerous bangers for us in the past. So that qualifies you, at least, for this role. I'm quite confident. So where do we want to get started? Again, the big thing just happened.
Yeah, the big thing. I mean, we're recording this on November 15th. So just shortly after the election of Donald Trump, which, I mean, certainly took me by surprise going into election night. I was expecting not just a win, but a big win. And that very much did not materialize.
No, very much not.
No, not even a little bit.
A massive, incredible disappointment.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, for me, this is like a moment to like really take a step back and try to rethink what I think about the electorate and the country we live in. And it's frustrating for me in a way because so much of the punditry that I've seen on it just seems to be people taking whatever they already believed and declaring that this election proves that they were right all along. You know, the people who always wanted the Democrats to move rightwards on abortion or on trans rights are declaring that this proves the Democrats need to move to the right. The people who want the Democrats to move to the left, they're declaring this proves the Democrats need to move to the left. So I think it's maybe an occasion to not do that, but to really take a more sober look at what just happened.
Yeah, because just think, if Harris had won, these people would be saying, now, just because Harris won, lots of people didn't vote for Harris. And so Democrats should move toward those people, as a gesture of whatever. So, we get the same lesson no matter what, don't we?
Yeah, there's certainly some people out there who, I mean, they know what the answer is. They just need to work out the particular details. So, I mean, I guess my question for you is, I mean, what just happened? What do you think explains what we just saw this last week?
Well, it's not a satisfying answer, but, in a country with an electorate that is on the order of 150, 160 million people, some few millions moved, and it's funny because that has a lot of causes. Everything that happens has a lot of causes. You know why we're doing this podcast today, Samantha?
Because of the initial conditions of the universe.
Yes, exactly. The Big Bang. You spotted my joke. This is why this podcast is going to work so great, right? Yeah, and a lot of other things. And that's the answer for the election too. There's many causes, and some of them are long runs, some of them are intermediate runs, some of them are short run in terms of how quickly they can be changed, right? So we can look at really long run things that like provide a base for the Republican Party, provide a base for Donald Trump, right? And then we can look at the short run things, such as the kinds of things which the Harris campaign appears to have done pretty well with, like the early analytics that people are putting up seem to suggest that like the campaigning in the battleground states worked a bit, but there's only so many factors that you can probably affect in 3 months. You know what I mean? And the question is, how many of these longer run factors mattered and just weren't amenable to things you can do in 3 months. And my guess is the longer run factors were too much to overcome. That Harris probably did about as well as she could once Biden has stepped down, and we can rewind further back and say if Biden had never run in the first place, would things have been better? And maybe it would have been a bit better, but man.
I mean, so I do want to dwell on that point you made there, which is that there's going to be a lot of people coming out to blame Harris specifically or this or that messaging choice she made and the campaign. And like you say, Harris's numbers in the states where she campaigns, she does better. She does noticeably better than the states where she doesn't campaign. Whatever she did on the campaign trail, it was effective, right? The machine she built to generate turnout was in the environment she was given. It worked pretty well. Still lost, though. So then we have to go looking for other questions, other answers about what drove that.
We know more now because we know the result. But there's also something to be said for the judgment that you would have made the day before Election Day. And I think people would have said Harris has run a great campaign. That it turned out not to be enough, not clear that that's their fault, But the judgment in isolation of the results, I think, is that she did pretty well. She was courageous. She did everything she needed to do. She stepped up into the debate, and of course you can argue things like didn't do enough interviews, should have gone on Rogan, but you can blame us too because we didn't start the Neon Liberalism podcast sooner and get a huge audience. So obviously partially our fault.
It's of all the people to blame, it's us personally because we did not reach the young men and women of America. And convince them of the values of liberalism. So we're going to change that going forwards. Here we are, neon liberalism.
But think about a presidential campaign. It's like we put her up there, we put Walz up there, and then there's 20,000 decisions they get to make. You know what I mean? Like they're in charge, they're running the campaign, they got to make 20,000 decisions. Did they get 1,000 of them wrong? If so, pretty good job by them. Do you know what I mean? So that's kind of where I come down on it.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. In particular, I think that the blame game is, everyone's going to be looking for someone to blame, and I don't think that's terribly helpful. In terms of, like you said, there are longer term structural issues that explain why, Republicans could put up a ham sandwich and the ham sandwich would get 45% of the votes. And the same is true of the Democrats, right? That party polarization, it's very high. Candidates with a D or R, they have a very high floor. But in terms of medium term issues that influenced the outcome of this election, right now I'm kind of seeing 3 narratives out there that I think are worth talking about. And one of them is that Bidenomics failed. Right, that whatever Biden did economically in office, inflation, people did not like it. And maybe if you go looking for just the right economic indicator, you can show that people's lives weren't getting better and that torpedoed Biden and that it torpedoed Harris because of her association with Biden. I think there's another narrative that Democrats have gone, like I said, too far left. Like that's the narrative that Democrats have gone too far left on cultural issues, big air quotes right there. Whether that's trans issues or affirmative action or immigration or using the wrong word for Latino people, whatever, that this alienated American voters and that they need to moderate on, again, quote unquote, cultural issues. Narrative number 3 is that it isn't really a material factor, but it is about misinformation. It's about the media. It's about the people who voted for Donald Trump mostly believed deeply false things about the country and what's happening in our country. And that the more news you read, the less likely you were to vote for Donald Trump. Right. And so there's a narrative in the air, in the media we consume, in the social media that we produce, that is a narrative of doom and gloom, and that drives outcomes, again, somewhat independently of material concerns. So to me, that seems like the state of the debate at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to tentatively throw out a 4th. And we could probably lump it in with number 2 or number 3 if we wanted to. I think it's probably fair enough that it stands on its own. And I do think this is medium term. I think many people believe Donald Trump is a Christian prophet and that this played a role. We look at, the earliest attempts to break down results in the exit polls, and we see an incredible percentage of evangelical Christians voting for Donald Trump. We have a lot of reporting, and probably a lot of people have personal experiences that people look at this man in religious terms. Even people who don't look at him in religious terms think that he is a truth teller and a bringer of truth in what almost has to be interpreted as a religious manner when you try to square it with the fact that Donald Trump tells dozens of lies on television every day, right? And yet he's perceived as a truth teller. I don't know that you can, there's the misinformation narrative that you mentioned, right? But I don't think it's misinformation when you look at the guy saying lies all the time and you say, he's the one telling the truth, right? It's not the information, it's it's interpretation, but it's an interpretation on such an unbelievably deep level. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's why maybe I shouldn't have said even misinformation, because that gives the impression of, some shadowy cabal of people who, some, Russian spy agency that's pushing some narrative, which, that did actually happen. But
yeah, I was going to say that's a
real thing that happened. But I think one of the things that Donald Trump, let's admit it, he's very successful at is branding. He's very successful at branding himself as a successful businessman, but also as an outsider, as a maverick, like you say, as a truth teller, someone who's not beholden to the party.
He's literally
Um,
successful at branding his name on the cover of the Bibles he sells.
Yeah, to take one example. And
Yeah.
I think that ability is very valuable in a year when incumbent parties lost across the entire Western world, right? That whatever kind of a world system we've got going on here, there genuinely seems to be a lot of dissatisfaction with it. And whether or not you have real answers, whether or not you are going to do good things for people, if you can brand yourself as an outsider, I think that attracts people.
And it'll be easy to relate what I am about to say next to when people propose the idea that society has become lower in terms of trusting one another and social networks are frayed. And it'll be easy for people to connect what I'm about to say to that. And that's fair. But and there have been always, this is always true, like in a very, very large society like ours, there's just going to be people who are socially distant from political life. People who just don't know anybody who works in politics, don't know anybody who is an office holder, don't know anybody who works on campaigns, don't have any even like fourth or fifth connection, in terms of steps, the degrees, that's the word I'm looking for. Like not even a fourth or fifth degree connection to people working in Washington, D.C., right? And when you think about people who lack that sort of socially networked connection to people who are personally involved in politics, then what politics appears to you is purely on your television set, is purely on your computer screen. And you don't really know who's a phony at that point. There's not like these other ways of kind of being assured that such and such person is on the level, right? Such and such person is genuinely on your side or something, They all appear to be, they might as well all be actors. You see everybody on TV screen. It's like one politician or another, no real basis on what to think of them except the performance on the screen. And you were just saying, Donald Trump, very good performer, right?
Yeah.
Extremely good at
No,
it, right?
I think that's right. He's a very good performer. I mean, again, like it or not. And part of that is that he comes up in the entertainment industry.
Right.
Right. And when you're in entertainment, you can either work a crowd or you can't. And it'll be obvious to you very quickly. Right. You have like very dynamic feedback about your ability to, like I said, to brand yourself or to work a crowd or to be charismatic. Like just a focus group or polling or a little stage managed, performance in a hotel room where you have someone on your campaign staff pretending to be the opposite number. These are situations that like you control too much, and so you're never gonna like get the really harsh feedback out of them. Um, and so I think on some level we need to think more about running candidates who show that they can work social media in the age of social media. I mean, like I don't love it, but I think it's just this is what you need to be able to do.
Yeah.
If you're going to be able to run a presidential campaign, is to do it and be able to do it straight from the go. Right, to display that authenticity that people like.
Yeah. Well, whatever they perceive as authenticity, right? But
Yeah,
so
exactly.
the conventional way that you work up to the top in political life is people trust you. They put you in the next higher position, basically based on their personal trust in you, their personal knowledge of you. The party elevates people through its internal processes, and then a lot of that gets projected into the primary through endorsements and things like that, right? And so people move up and they move along on the basis of other people in the party having that personal networked social trust in that person, right? And so we end up with someone at the top who is maybe extremely trustworthy. I think Democrats trust Kamala Harris. The people around her, the people who know her, I think clearly trust her. And on down the line, then she gets on TV into this world where you're facing a lot of voters who aren't connected to you in that way. Through that sort of personal / social network, right?
No,
and they're
I
just
think
seeing you on TV as a performer, and that's a tough gig.
no, absolutely. I think that the Democratic Party has consistently turned out presidential candidates who are competent, who are have gathered the support of their party. I think that is not working for us as well as we might like it to. I mean, again, this is just we have to. After a loss like we've just experienced, we have to be a little bit cold-blooded about what brought us here and what we might need to do differently next time. So, like I said, I think the whole, like this aspect of performance and aesthetics is central to what just happened. Where do you stand on the whole Bidenomics thing? did Biden do a good job on the economy?
He comes into office and things are a wreck. And
Yeah.
I do teach this subject. This is a thing that I do. I teach principles of macroeconomics at a community college, so I'm supposed to know a little bit about this. But
So yeah, Professor, what's the answer?
yeah. Well, the answer. Did I see somebody recently say nobody understands macroeconomics? I'm pretty sure I saw that being mentioned on
Yeah, I
social
think that was
media.
Sharon.
I think that was Sharon, who we should have on this podcast sooner rather than later. Look, a lot of things you can say. One thing is the president doesn't control a whole lot. They control some things, but we're talking worldwide trends coming out of the pandemic. We're talking that big inflation did not just hit the United States, it hit a lot of countries. And the pandemic is not something in any president's control. So you have a severe recession followed by a lot of inflation. Neither of those things is in the president's control. We can look at the recovery from the recession in the United States, and we can all look at the data and see that it's stronger than in a lot of peer countries. And we all see that data because we are the kind of people who look at that data and trust and believe in it. So that's good for us. And if we are trying to assess how the government of the United States has done in the past few years on the economy, I think that's the only grounds you can really assess it on. That said, this issue of inflation, and you hear a lot of economists, I guess they're economists, you hear a lot of economists questioning the extent to which inflation is really damaging for people. They say, well, when prices go up, of course, incomes tend to go up because after all, the prices we pay end up as the seller's income, right? So a trend toward higher prices, of course, drives incomes higher. But it's also going to be true that not all of the money that we have available to spend comes from our income. Some of it comes out of our wealth. Some of it comes out of our cash money balances in the bank. And inflation makes you less able to buy things if you have positive savings. Everyone understands that inflation is good for debtors. Equally, inflation is not so great for creditors, right? And so depending on, whether it's a person who has a lot of savings and a lot of wealth or someone who's in consumer debt, inflation is going to affect them very differently. And so you can't just simply, I think, dismiss the idea that inflation has a real consequence for people that is going to be felt negatively by people. But big picture, there's not the magical button that makes everything good at once that the president just slaps on. So
I mean, if only there. I mean, it would be pretty funny if there was that button in the office and they just refused to push it. It's like it's right there, but I'm not going to America because
easy.
no. I mean, I think that's right. I mean, I think like some of this gets to what I'm trying to say about how you can. I mean, you can massage the economic indicators if you want to find like, oh, like, yeah, we did better than our peer countries, and if we compare this number to that number, our number is a better number. And you can do the same thing in the other direction. You can say, well, actually, if you compare real median weekly, not hourly, weekly household, not individual income, and then you compare the rate of growth from 2022 to, 2012, and then the one number is worse than the other number, and clearly that's definitely what people were upset about. And I think it's that last step that I'm always a little bit curious of. There's enormous wealth of things happening in the world, and proving that like your particular preferred economic indicator is actually the one that explains why people feel the way they do, I think is another step here. Anyways,
I think we have overwhelming data from the last few years that the underlying conditions in the economy, however imperfectly they're reflected in the economic data, do not have a lot to do with how people feel about the economy. The political party of the president seems to be far and away the number one indicator that controls or affects how people feel about the economy. Big, difficult situation there,
yes.
right?
No, I think I mean, you look at these charts and, somebody's trying to tell you about how inflation or real median wages drives economic sentiment. And then you just point to the part on the chart where we have a presidential election. And you see this enormous swing in consumer sentiment because people are using the economy like as a proxy for some other deeper variable about how they feel about the world, or so one might argue.
Yeah, we long have had this question like, how are you doing? How is your family doing economically? Okay, how do you think your state is doing? How do you think the country is doing? And we've often seen divergence in that, right? And now we're just seeing it even bigger, and then it's even swinging wildly to one pole or the other based on who the president is. It's a
Yeah, I mean, so just to grind one of my own little hobby horse grind a hobby horse, get on a hobby horse, grind an axe. I'm going to do both at once here. But I think, on the whole, Biden's response to the very serious crisis of COVID and the COVID recession was pretty good. I mean, like I said, that our numbers were better than our peer nations' numbers. That was great. I lived through the recession of 2008, and that was not a party. Let's be clear. And so the stimulus that we did in response to COVID, it worked really well, it seems. What I think is true is that also in this time period, Democrats did not really do anything about the basic economic problems that Americans are facing today, like housing, like the cost of housing, the cost of healthcare, the cost of children and an education. These are still very, very high. People don't like it very, and I think that's a real problem. I mean, I've written about this. I'm not going to beat that horse too hard, beat the hobby horse. About the price of housing, but it's far too high because of policy choices that we've made. And it's not just that Biden and national Democrats don't really get a handle on these things, but blue states don't get a handle on these things. California, New York, states where Democrats have like an absolute hammerlock on governance at the state level. And, if people are voting with their feet, then they're not voting for blue states. They're voting for red states, right? People are leaving California and moving to Texas. People are leaving New York and moving to Florida. Whatever the total package of blue state governance is, it's not working. And I think that people gave Biden a chance to run the country. They gave Democrats a chance to run the country. And did we fix these deeper problems? No. Is Donald Trump going to fix these problems? Absolutely not. But if we want to gain people's loyalty, I feel like we need to start making more progress here.
Yeah. I think there's a talk bias over an action bias, and that it for Democrats, and that hurts them a lot. I'm down here in Austin, by the way. It's a good moment for us to mention where we are. And a lot of people nationally have been pointing to some statistics saying rents in Austin are down. And is that because Austin is building housing? And to a large extent, I think that's right. I think Austin City Council has swung really strongly in the last decade in the direction of building housing away from NIMBYism, which was under Democrats. I mean, right, it's Austin, right? It was Democrats then, it's Democrats now. But within the Democratic Party here, a big push toward urbanist policies and away from the housing supply limiting policies that were being pushed 10 years ago, and we're seeing the effects. And I'm sure there's other factors driving housing prices around here, of course. But we need that better governance in the cities. It can't just be here; it's got to be elsewhere. And of course, when we have better housing in Austin, this redounds to the benefit of Texas, of course. So that's electorally, which, well,
yeah. I mean, so while we're talking about where we live, I live in Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh's population has been relatively flat. We're not declining the way some of the Rust Belt cities are really declining. Population's flat, but that doesn't mean that where in the whole Pittsburgh metro people want to live is constant. And so I've absolutely seen neighborhoods, nothing materially changes. It's the same old row houses, but the price goes up like you wouldn't believe, because now this is where people want to live, because there's more amenities, there's more jobs, there's more access to services, and we're not building very much. And so the price just keeps going up, right? And this is in a purple state. This, again, Democrats have had a lock on city governance here for a long time. And are we doing anything about it? Not as much as we could.
Yeah. So we tackled Bidenomics. Should we try Samantha's number 2? Have Democrats just gone too far left? Is that the problem?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to be seeing. I was going to say you're going to be seeing a lot of this from people who already were uncomfortable about trans people or pronouns or whatever it is they're uncomfortable about. Now they're going to be really uncomfortable about it and kind of in your face about it. Obviously, let's be real here. Donald Trump campaigned very heavily on transgender issues. Republicans have been trying to foment trans panic for several election cycles now. They were big on, panics about gay marriage and the gays 20 years ago. George W. Bush campaigned on making gay marriage illegal. There was all these panics about how the gays are coming for your kids. And if we let them get married, they're going to, gayify your kids. They've kind of given up on that, but now, now they're coming after us trans people. But there's a different question, which is it working for them, or is this just something they're doing because, like, they're weirdos who are obsessed with gender?
I mean,
Um,
let me say something really blunt. If we're looking at the facts of the campaign and we look at the swing states where both campaigns campaigned, they didn't campaign anywhere else. And if we've looked at the swing states and concluded that the Harris campaign was doing better, that they swung voters toward them, it was in the swing states where the Trump campaign was campaigning. And they were campaigning with their anti trans stuff. And if the Harris campaign won the campaign in the swing states, the Trump campaign lost the campaign in the swing states. Objectively, the campaigning didn't work. I'm just going to say that bluntly.
I happen to agree. I mean, like I was saying, this isn't even the first election cycle where they've run on trans issues,
That's right.
and it's never really done them any favors. In various, I mean, you can look into various kinds of elections, various candidates who ran very heavily on trans issues, and it just didn't help them. They're convinced it will help them, probably because the whole Republican system these days is producing people who are pretty ideological about, like, patriarchy and gender, and like trans people are like this particular problem for them. They want to see a world where there are men who are men and women who are women and nothing else allowed. And so, like, for their own ideological reasons, they tend to get obsessed with hating this tiny kind of unimportant minority. But it's not really like it's electoral genius we're watching here. And I think you can say the same about a lot of the other, like, so-called cultural issues, like abortion, which is for some reason is like the cultural issue in America, despite it not, like, abortion is not a culture. Whether you're forced to carry a child to term is like one of the most materially important things that might happen in your life. But whatever, we call them cultural issues for some reason. But anyways, the point is that abortion was on the ballot, not just in the person of Harris, but like literally there were referenda on abortion across the country. And they did really well. Even in very, very deep red states, abortion protections passed, right? People seem to like the having the right to an abortion. They like Republicans for other reasons that are trying to arrive at, but it's not the Democratic position on abortion that's turning people off.
Yeah, I don't see a lot of evidence for this idea that Democrats have gone too far left. Show me the centrist Dems that ran ahead of Kamala Harris, and you can also show me the left Dems that ran ahead of Kamala Harris, and so, like we've said, this is an argument that the same people make every single day and every single year for the last number of years, regardless of the electoral results. So it's hard to lend it a lot of credence. It's hard to even start with the analysis because the people who put forward this argument don't seem to do serious analysis. It clearly just comes from within them. Some Democrats are too left culturally for them and they don't like it. And they just transmute this in their minds into actually, this is the right strategy electorally. Right. And I just think the evidence for that is so little.
No, I think that's exactly right. I mean, it's the people who are on this train, it's very visible, it's very transparent that they personally are uncomfortable with trans people, and that, like you say, they project that out into an electorate and they say, no, I don't believe this myself. This is just what the people want. And I think, you just have to be, I mean, I would like for us here on Neon Liberalism to be a little more honest about the difference between what we want politically and what we believe politically and what is tactically or strategically useful, from a political campaigning perspective. There are things that I believe in very deeply that I don't think would be a good idea to campaign on. And likewise, there are things that are popular that I don't believe in, and these are just different topics, frankly.
Yeah, it strikes me this would be a really good transition to talk about the number one campaign pledge by the Trump campaign.
Here we go.
Mass deportation. Not always exactly clear of who, just mass deportation. Famously, the signs at the Republican National Convention said mass deportation now. Of who? Left totally unsaid. Just mass deportation. Go ahead.
No, I think it's interesting when you say it's unclear who, because there will be, policy wonks in the Republican thinkosphere, and they'll have an answer for you. They'll say, oh, it's illegal immigrants,
Sure.
all of them. And we did some numbers and we figured out how many there are, yada, yada. But that's not what people heard, right? People, like you were saying, people who are not neck deep in politics, who see something on a TV screen, they saw this and they assumed, well, he's going to deport the bad ones, right? I'm an immigrant, and in fact, my mother is an illegal immigrant. She's here illegally, but we're hardworking Americans, and obviously, Mr. Trump's not going to deport my mother. He's going to deport the bad illegal immigrants. Like as Trump's famous phrase, the ones who are bringing crime, right? Whatever that image you see on Fox News of a bunch of guys with guns and tattoos staring at the camera looking dangerous. Those guys over there somewhere. We're going to deport the bad ones, but not anyone I know, certainly. Right.
Yeah, and the reason what we were just previously talking about served as a good transition to the topic of mass deportation is we were saying, have the Dems moved too far left on quote unquote cultural issues, and how we want to be clear that we keep distinct, what's successful messaging or whatever, and what we think would be a good thing to run on versus what we believe in. And here on this issue, on all the bundle of issues that go into this idea of mass deportation, among the bundle of those issues are some issues, or at least some survey questions that seem to poll pretty well for Republicans, right? Like,
Absolutely.
when you ask people, do you like illegal immigration? They go, well, no, I don't like illegal immigration, and okay, well, you've got some poll number there, right? But among the few things I've done previous in my life to whatever it is I'm doing now is I worked for a market research company, and believe me, there's a lot of magic in question wording to get different kind of answers. And people have pointed out that when you start to phrase the question differently and you start to say, how do you want to treat people who you maybe don't feel positively necessarily toward, but who are immigrants? Do you want to just deport them, or do you want to give them a pathway to citizenship? And suddenly pathway to citizenship sounds good, and you see nice poll numbers for that, right? So there's going to be a lot of people throwing up a lot of data saying that actually this policy is popular, and I'm kind of going to say I'm unconvinced of exactly how popular it is.
I think unfortunately, we are about to find out in a big way whether it's really popular. There are a lot of people out there who's like, what was the line from the first Trump administration? Take him seriously, but not literally. I think this is one of these things. This is his core campaign promise, and like he's also kind of this old line racist who really hates immigrants, or the wrong kind of immigrant. And I think in particular that we're looking at a situation where Trump is inheriting a bureaucracy and an institution, namely ICE, Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, Customs and Border Patrol, that really like deporting immigrants. So, they're very dissatisfied with it under Biden. And so he's going to have that institutional backing to start doing very scaled up deportations. You can see the private prison industry is already planning enormous expansions to handle just the numbers of people that we're talking about. I think they are, as I believe you wrote, they're going to try. Or was that Adam? I can't remember. Anyway, I know.
Adam says Trump is going to try to subvert American democracy.
Right. Yeah, you wrote if you do it.
If you do
right.
it, that was the title of my 1 minute read on mass deportation. If you do it, what will you do?
You add those two things together, he will try, and if you do it and you get a conclusion that is not a pretty conclusion.
No, it's
what
not.
it's going to take to try and move 10 or 15 million people out of America.
Well, getting way ahead of themselves if to end up at move them out of America. If anyone Anyone who may have read my piece, if they read closely, they might have noticed I never actually said anything about the policy resulting in anyone being actually moved out of the country. Because I think that is at the end of the policy. And it's a big question whether all the actions that are taken in the name of mass deportation end up there.
I think
But
that's
I,
exactly right. And you can see that, I mean, other countries that have tried these kinds of strategies, it's always a struggle to get the country on the other end to accept millions of people that you're just, shoving out out of an airplane.
struggle puts it
Um,
nicely. There's nowhere for them to go, is what I would say. There's no place standing
yes.
ready to take,
Yes. And so your conclusion was that we're going to see camps. We're going to see prison camps of an enormous scale of totally inhumane conditions that people's friends, their relatives, their loved ones are going to be put in the. I mean, that right? Was that not the conclusion of your essay?
if we do it.
If we do it.
If we do it. And it is still a big if, and we must push on that if as much as we can. I don't want to say that it will happen because what it is an atrocity. I mean, this man's number one campaign pledge was to commit an atrocity. And that's obviously just incredibly hard to grapple with, that's the number one campaign pledge, right?
Yes.
Let's not go down the list, but I would wonder if anyone can point to a mass deportation in history and say, that was a good one. Glad they did that. I generally think that is not what we think about these things. I think we
I
almost
mean,
completely look back at every single one and say, that was terrible. So I think we're just to have a straight up pledge to commit an atrocity, rip people out of their homes, and, to have it be done in the name of a supposed illegality that like the people who are going to be deported, whichever of us it turns out to be, the idea that something that they have done is illegal that somehow justifies this is laughable coming from people who want to shred the law. This program is not going to be run in a legal way itself. So number one, stand up there and talk about how the atrocity you're going to commit is justified by quote unquote something illegal is just beyond just absolutely insane. But you were saying that my piece says that where we end up is, if we do it, and I just say we as in America, but if it's done, the reason the piece says we end up with camps is fundamentally this, once that decision is taken that you're going to treat some of us as criminals and some of us as invaders, and once that decision is taken, then you got to go get those people. You can't let them escape. You're not going to let them stick around doing what they're doing. You're going to go get them. So step one is take them from their homes. And that means take them away from their lives. It means everything that they've been doing to provide their own shelter. And I shouldn't say they, I want to say those of us that, I want to adopt, a perspective of humanity, right? Like, so when you take some of us away from what we do for a living, take us away from our homes, you take away the shelter we're providing for ourselves, take away the food we're providing for ourselves, take away the clothes we're providing ourselves, for the education we're providing for ourselves, the entertainment we're providing for ourselves, everything. And you put that all on the American taxpayer, actually.
that's right.
The moment that this policy is made and those of us targeted by it are taken from our homes, you put the entirety of what sustains them on the American taxpayer. And guess what? The American taxpayer is not going to want to pay much. Sure, there'll be some big allocations to get this policy done. Congress will allocate the money, or maybe, Donald Trump will just snap his fingers and the money will be allocated somehow out of public funding. But of course, these people who are setting this up, of course, they're going to go to private contractors to run it. And so let's look at it from the perspective of the private contractor. You have some amount of revenue that's been allocated to you to do this. And how can you increase your profits? You can't easily go back and increase your revenue. So what are you going to do? You're going to cut costs. So are people going to end up in hotels? Are people going to end up in reasonable housing? Or are they going to end up in the cheapest thing you can throw up, which is camps, right? And so that's why you get to camps, I think, as just a sort of matter of just the basic forgive me the word, economics of it, right? And the camps, in order to maximize the profit or minimize the public expenditure, whichever way you want to put it, they just end up absolutely squalorous. And then so you end up with these camps where you've concentrated certain groups of us. And by the
Yeah,
way,
there's a word.
that's where the name "Can't Happen Here" camps comes from, because none of this can happen here, and that's why they're called "Can't Happen Here" camps. If you like that, that's my
Yeah.
that's my one prepared joke. I had that one all wound up. I hope
Oh
people.
no, it was pretty good.
So
Gonna have to use that one.
oh man. Anyway,
So that's a bleak
it
future,
is
a
bleak.
possible future.
A campaign that's number one pledge is to commit an atrocity is bleak, and the atrocity itself is bleak, right? But here would be, let's talk about the if of it a little bit, right? Because
Yes, that's
as much as Donald Trump may want to do this, as much as some people polled, as much as it may seem that some of the people polled want to do this, right? I think there are going to be plenty of people who don't want it, and honest, and this has been often talked about is businesses that employ lots of people who might be targeted may not really be in favor of this, because it would be targeting part of that business. It's literally targeting part of the people who work for the company, right? And so
yeah. I mean, I
you could,
assume most of America's farmers, and by farmer I mean like farmland owners, are going to be very, very unhappy with a mass deportation program very quickly.
unfortunately, there's an aspect or a way things might proceed that the people running such businesses might actually not be so opposed to, which is that if rather than a reality that is carried out, mass portation ends up as a policy that could be enforced upon you at any time if you act up.
Yeah, the threat of it.
And then we end up with an underclass that is silenced and bullied and maybe abused and surely little paid. And that's a horrible outcome. So
Yeah, so
this
I
is just
I
this is a terrible policy, however it plays out. And to call it a policy again is, it's policy is a ridiculous word for it that I don't even want to use.
yeah, I want to take a step back here from this particular atrocity and talk a little bit more about what we can expect from Trump's second term. There's a lot of talk about Trump as a tyrant or as an autocrat or as a fascist. And I want to talk a little bit about different possibilities of autocratic government. And we're gonna go play the hits here. I'm gonna talk a little bit about Stalin, and I'm gonna talk about Mussolini. And Mussolini being the guy who invents the term fascism, he's the first fascist, and he becomes effectively the supreme power in Italy based on being like this macho bully with a newspaper column. The story is more complicated, but like this is kind of his where he comes from is as a newspaper man, a media personality, a poster, we would say. And he's in power in Italy for several decades, I want to say, for a while. And when World War II comes, or whatever, even before World War II, when he invades Ethiopia, it becomes very clear that all of Mussolini's aspirations to being like a man of steel who's remade his country into a great warlike industrial society is all fake, right? That Mussolini was never able to really reshape Italian society on a deep and pervasive level. That he mostly got the Italy. I mean, it was a worse Italy, he let's just say that, but wasn't able to change the course of Italy, aside from losing this whole war. And we can contrast that with Stalin, right? Stalin and the Bolsheviks, they inherit a country that is falling apart, right? That there is civil war from Ukraine to Vladivostok, and starvation, everything's gone to shit. And what they're effectively able to do is to absolutely transform that society down to the smallest individual level of thought and action. And they're able to do this through the Leninist party structure, and in particular through Stalin just being like a very personally detail-oriented, energetic, organized individual he could tell you the steel output of every factory in the Urals because he knew it, because he was just obsessed with the details. And he could also give you a list of exactly who he wanted killed for, whatever reason it happened to be. And he had this level of organization to transform Soviet society into the totalitarian society of extreme control that he's famous for, killed millions. I mean, really tens of millions of people killed because of the choices of Stalin in a way that Mussolini did not kill tens of millions of Italians. He was never able to motivate Italians to kill 10 million other Italians. And so the worst outcomes that our imaginations conjure from Trump, I think, are going to require someone who is more organized than he is. Right? Trump is I don't know, man. He's like an old dude who wants to watch the Gorilla Channel. Right. And like, look, you can look at who he's been appointing or he's been trying to appoint are like people he sees on TV or like who hang out with him at Mar-a-Lago. Like his pick for Secretary of Defense is like a Fox News commentator. These are people who are going to do harm. They are absolutely going to do harm. They're going to cause chaos. They're going to chip away at the edifice of government. But I think a Fox News commentator is going to struggle to control the American military and to get it to do things that it doesn't really want to do. That the permanent civil service, so to speak, has a lot of inertia.
You
And
know,
this is why mass deportation specifically, I think, is going to be one where it works because the permanent civil service, again, CBP and ICE, want to do it, right? They're already all on board that train. That's my own guess about what we're looking at is a more chaotic form. I mean, the same kind of chaos in government that we got from Donald Trump the first time. There was just a constant rotating cast of characters in the Trump White House, and some were up and some were down. He fired some and he shanked some, and not really based on a clear ability to pursue and enact policy or to transform society, but just because that was what he saw on the news that morning.
I mean, I think my vision of what motivates Trump is money and the opportunity to turn as much public money into private money for himself is probably his number one. I mean, he's running the campaign and he's also like taking time out to pitch NFTs or whatever the heck it was. It's like the Lincoln Mint or I'm dating myself by throwing up that reference, right? But if Trump is motivated largely by money and he creates this, and that goes along with, what you're saying about people he just saw on TV. He's seeing performers. He's seeing people who potentially are good at creating distractions. And the more distractions there are in the news, the less opportunity there is for what are tariffs exactly to become the thing that appears on the news that night because they're too busy covering the latest just absolute
Yes.
chaos that Trump's, TV
No.
performers have thrown up, right? That might be a theory of Trump, but you mentioned the nominee for, or at least what is announced to be might be the nominee for Secretary of Defense, this Pete Hegseth, right? And it's interesting that you brought up Mussolini because as I was reading a couple articles, getting a sense of Pete Hegseth and seeing people quoting things that he's written, he has this sort of narrative of like American troops coming home and what has been done to this country by other people, and therefore the troops coming home, it's their time to rule and set things right. And this actually was kind of the narrative of the early Italian fascists, as far as little as I understand history, was that coming home from World War One, it was like, we have the right to, we've given a lot to this country, and now it's our right to come home and run things. We're the ones who sacrificed, so we get to call the shots now. And there was a little, I don't know. I read some of the quotations I read some of the quotations from Hegseth, and those light bulbs went off in my head, like whether that's fair or not. I don't want to be unfair to the guy. Maybe he'll turn out to be okay. But
Yeah. I mean, I think disaffected veterans were a very important part of both Mussolini and Hitler's program. They provided a large group of men who were ready and willing to do violence to be part of their kind of paramilitary organizations. I think Hegseth might aspire to that. I don't think we're going to have anything exactly analogous to that just because just in terms of the raw numbers, like the number of people who served in World War One as a percentage of the population is just unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not looking at like that level of like ready, willing, able to do
No,
violence.
not at all.
And
It was just
also
something that
because
had a strange echo to me,
no,
you know?
no, I think you're right that these people aspire to this shit, but that they talk a lot. And it's going to be very bad. I want to be clear about that. But I don't think they are going to be able to recreate the structures like, the black shirts or the brown shirts in quite the same way. Uh, Again, there are existing organizations like the Proud Boys, like various other kinds of like right-wing militias, but these are, I don't know. Well, I would say smaller scale, but we'll see.
Things are
Uh,
massively different. Things are different in so many ways. Just this, we have this thoroughly developed, like, I don't even know what you want to call it, but like, world of entertainment culture, like, and it's not that those things, it's not that entertainment and culture are new, but you know, you're talking about the size, right? I mean, and that's where I'm going with this too. You're talking about numbers of people who are, how many people are disaffected, angry, um, of the sort that you're talking about, right? And how many people just want to grill, and how many people want the NBA to go on, the National Basketball Association, and I'm in a numbers sense, I think, things are just so different. It's just so different. We want to reach back for these analogies that are 100 years ago. And I just think we honestly have no idea how people pushing these ideas, and again, to call this proposed atrocity an idea is even more offensive to me than to call it a policy, but to think we have some sense of how it's going to play out because of these regimes from increasingly far in the past, I just think we just don't know.
yeah, I mean, I wanna get back to something you said about the chaos of the Trump administration, and we all know that the first Trump administration provided. I mean, the media just loved that guy because he was constant stories about this or that thing that was going on in the White House and some stupid thing he'd said, and endless entertainment. And the way that that entertainment gets used to obscure the truth about what's happening in the world, what's really happening, or a real grounded, sober analysis of what has happened. And so here on neoliberalism, I like to think we're going to try and cut through that noise a little bit, provide a weekly liberal perspective on what's going on, what matters, what's true, and what's just noise.